and Special Agent Daryl Carnley. From the United States Department of Treasury's Internal Revenue Service, we are joined by Assistant Special Agent in Charge Ron Lecker, Supervisory Special Agent Scott Schneider, and Special Agent Emmett Denham. Also, we are joined by Assistant United States Attorney Jason Cootie. He is a senior prosecutor and he serves within our public trust unit. Mr. Cootie is the primary federal prosecutor on this important case. In a few moments, Mr. Cootie will describe the criminal kickback scheme that is alleged in the indictment. Assistant Special Agents in Charge Bell and Lecker will also share some details about this corrupt kickback scheme in which it is alleged that federal, state, and local government officials and others breached the public's trust and conspired to steal, and did in fact steal, from the public that they had been trusted to serve. As Mr. Cootie will explain, the indictment alleges the corrupt abuse of public office for personal enrichment through the theft of taxpayer dollars by 29 past and present government officials who worked at all levels of our government, state, local, and federal. This massive criminal scheme shocks the sensibilities of any citizen because it involved 29 key people conspiring together to betray the public trust, to stain the privilege of public service, and to personally profit at the expense of taxpayers. The brazen nature of this alleged network of corruption represents a flagrant abuse of power and position. This indictment should send an unmistakable message to anyone considering going down a parallel path to corrupt and criminal activity. If you do not stop, then we will come for you as well, just as we have come for those who have already engaged in corrupt activity. The investigation that resulted in today's indictment is ongoing, and we anticipate that additional public corruption that involves other public officials will be revealed to the public in the very near future. We anticipate that some of those who have been indicted here today will cooperate in the ongoing investigation and provide truthful information about others who may be involved in other corrupt activities. We shall continue to pursue, prosecute, and punish corrupt public officials who threaten our way of life and our system of government by abusing their official power and by abusing our public resources for their personal gain. Elected and appointed officials at the local, state, and federal levels of public service must honor the public's trust in all of their decisions and actions. Our public trust unit will continue to focus on the pursuit of public corruption, but just as surely, our citizens should know that we will also focus on detecting, disrupting, and dismantling any effort to corrupt our election process by anyone who seeks to undermine the public's trust in our election system. We will strive each day to protect the public's right to trust in their federal, state, and local government and in our election system. Finally, I want to make it very clear that we know, that we in law enforcement know, that despite the alleged corrupt actions of these 29 people, that the vast majority of people who are in public service, the men and women who serve in all levels of our government, are truly dedicated public servants who loyally work to provide the trusted service that our citizens expect and deserve. But that very small group that serves for their own illegal benefit and profit, and those who illegally seek to influence them, will continue to be the targets of our work here in the Public Trust Unit. At this time, I'd like to introduce Assistant U.S. Attorney Jason Cootie.
Thank you. Good morning. The indictment announced today alleges that between May and December of 2017, Dwayne Crossan, who was then employed as a county executive director of the United States Department's Farm Service Agency, responsible for monitoring the activities in Bay, Holmes, and Washington counties here in the Panhandle, devised a kickback scheme in which he and his conspirators obtained over $373,000 in taxpayer funds. This is alleged to have occurred through the submission of fraudulent drought assistance claims. As the county executive director, Crossan was responsible for administering various farm programs, one of those the Livestock Forage Disaster Program. The LFP, as it's commonly referred to, provides government payments to eligible livestock owners who suffer grazing losses during a qualifying drought period. Those government disaster payments are based upon the number of livestock as well as the acreage used to sustain the livestock throughout a qualifying drought. Crossan is alleged to have submitted these fraudulent claims reflecting livestock and parcels of land that he and his conspirators did not own or did not lease. As a result, those government payments were then deposited into the respective bank accounts of the identified co-conspirators, and Crossan then, in turn, received cash kickbacks from the Crossan conspirators with the illegal taxpayer funds that were the substance of the proceeds. As reflected in this chart, the indictment alleges that Crossan solicited the personal identifying information of his co-conspirators, specifically their Social Security numbers, as well as their banking account routing numbers, such that the proceeds of the false claim could be equally divided. It's alleged that Crossan enlisted those co-conspirators to act as recruiters, as you can see, and then solicit additional individuals, many of whom were family members, employees, or close friends. The occupations of the co-conspirators are diverse, with many employed in state, local, and federal government positions. Their representative career fields include law enforcement, public works, health care, and retail sales, as well as one elected official. It's important for the public to appreciate and understand, as Mr. Keefe indicated, that agricultural disaster programs are designed to help the hardworking men and women who work tirelessly to produce safe, high-quality farm and food products for this nation. These disaster assistance programs are built on honesty and fair dealing. Those who would seek to defraud the American taxpayer of these necessary funds for nothing more than graft or greed will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Department of Agriculture, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Bell.
Good morning. As AUSA Cootie pointed out, the Livestock Forage Disaster Program was created to help stabilize the U.S. livestock industry and support producers whose grazing lands were significantly damaged by drought. The Office of Inspector General's goal is to bolster the integrity of critical programs for our nation's agricultural producers and deter individuals who seek to profit illegally from them. I would like to thank our law enforcement partners, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office and Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation, for their untiring support and collaboration in bringing this matter to indictment. Thank you.
Assistant Special Agent in Charge of the Department of Treasury's Internal Revenue Service, Ron Lecker.
Good morning. The IRS and special agents of IRS Criminal Investigation are here to support the U.S. Attorney's Office, Public Integrity Unit, and our unique financial investigative skills in order to uncover these types of criminal schemes. IRS often brings tax charges against recipients of illegal bribes and kickbacks. It is not uncommon that the recipient of money in exchange for an illegal benefit through a position of trust a quid pro quo, you might say, would not report these payments on their individual federal income tax returns. By tracing the money from the point of the fraud to its end user, agents can point a picture of the complicated transaction and the personal benefit derived by the recipient. Completing this link makes the case a strong case that juries can understand. The beauty and power of a financial case is that documents don't change their story. Documents don't lie. Documents don't go quiet, and they don't plead the fifth. From Al Capone to FIFA, IRS special agents have followed the money, gathered financial documents, and let those documents tell their own story. We will continue to stand ready to use our financial skills in support of our law enforcement partners in dismantling the tangled web of those who violate the duties to the taxpayers and the taxpaying citizens whom they serve. I would also like to take a moment to thank our partners with USDA, who first brought this case to our attention, as well as U.S. Attorney Larry Keefe and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jason Cootie. It is the work of these professionals and their staff, their attorneys and our agents, that make it possible for our office to assist in making a difference in the Northern District of Florida and our local communities. Thank you.
We're here to answer, to the extent that we can, any questions that you have. But all of you, I think, are veteran journalists and understand that we're very constrained at this stage of a matter from saying too much beyond what's in the indictment. But we're glad to take questions subject to that caveat.
Please raise your hand and identify your news organization if you want to ask a question.
Yes, please.
So you were mentioning earlier that this is an ongoing investigation, so are there potentially more conspirators who could be brought out from this investigation?
It is, as I said, an ongoing investigation, and that potential that you described does exist. Yes.
News 13's Kayla Tucker, what is happening now? Are these people in custody? When will they be in custody, and how much time could they be facing for this crime?
Mr. Cootie, you're probably best suited to address that.
Each of the 29 defendants identified in the indictment had their initial appearance yesterday at 1 o'clock in the Pensacola Division before the Honorable Michael J. Frank. They were released on terms and conditions. The trial date, as you will be provided in a subsequent release, is January 6th of 2020. They are released on conditions, and I think that addresses your question.
Yes.
Olivia Michael, News Channel 7. What prompted this investigation? Was there an insider tip? How was law enforcement alerted to this?
Well, Mr. Cootie can speak to this in greater depth, but it's a variant of what we've all heard in many contexts. Somebody who saw something said something. So if you see something, say something. But Mr. Cootie, you could probably expand on that as well.
The allegations giving rise to the indictment were first relayed by an employee of the federal government to the Office of Inspector General. That information enabled the talented individuals behind me to begin their investigation, and that was the genesis of the investigation giving rise to this indictment.
Yes, sir.
Tom McLaughlin, Northwest Florida News. Kyle Hudson had been indicted several months ago. Was that was that what brought this case forward, or did you use his information to finish up with this investigation?
Yeah, we don't want to speak to any of the particulars of things as granular as that in terms of what we're doing right now, in terms of the ongoing investigation, and in terms of how we've gotten where we are. There are multiple sources, multiple leads. All of those things factor into an investigation. Yes?
Can you list the 29 names? And if not, are there any that you can list that are local to Panama City or Bay County?
Shortly at the conclusion of this press conference, we will release a written press release that will identify names as well as past and present occupations of the 29 defendants.
Can you repeat the amount that was involved here that was kickback?
The amount.
How much did they actually apply for, and then how much was it?
The amount of illegal taxpayer funds exceeded $373,000. Of that amount, it's alleged in the indictment that a great portion of that was returned to Carlson and the co-conspirators in the form of cash kickbacks.
I'd like to just add to this question for the press. Were they positioned to go after more money if you all had not intervened in this investigation?
That is a fair statement that the claims would have continued insofar as the indictment alleges that Carlson, in his role as county executive director, was responsible for the filing of claims, and the allegations are that he and his conspirators had an agreement that if additional claims were filed and others were recruited, the proceeds would be split in varying increments depending upon who the recruiter was and their nexus to Crossan.
Yes, sir.
Yes, how long has the investigation been going on, and how far back y'all think the scheme has been going on? How far back do the charges date to, the indictments?
Mr. Cootie?
The indictment, which again you'll be provided, it was unsealed yesterday afternoon of the initial appearance of the defendants, alleged the conduct occurred in May of 2017 through December of 2017. In terms of the scheme itself, I think it's a fair characterization that that conduct, the initial conspiratorial activities, would have predated the initial filing of the claims in May of 2017.
Yes.
In terms of punishment for these conspirators, what's the maximum jail time we might be looking at?
Mr. Cootie?
The charges identified in the indictment are conspiracy to commit wire fraud with a maximum penalty of 20 years, theft of government funds. Some of the defendants are charged with aggravated identity theft in that they obtained the personal identifying information of unknown individuals associated with filing of the false claims. And then Mr. Crossan is also charged with income tax evasion as well as obstruction of the Internal Revenue laws. The respective penalties will be laid out further in the release that you'll be provided.
Can someone briefly talk about what the involvement of the local agencies was in this, or was it straight state investigations, or how much of a role did our local officials play in this?
Once again, Mr. Cootie.
We frequently partner with the state and locals, and it's an essential partnership. In this instance, however, given the way that the investigation began, the initial work was done by the Office of Inspector General. Given the allegations, they immediately began to work with our colleagues with the Internal Revenue Service, so the bulk of the investigation was conducted by those two federal agencies. However, we continue to work with our state and local partners on any matters that relate to corruption of these fraudulent programs or corruption in general.
Now, is the ongoing investigation considered with this, or is this what could be coming out a completely different situation?
Yeah, let me go back real quickly to your question, then I'll come to yours. I think most of you know that we've formed a public trust unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office that is staffed and devoted entirely to dealing with public corruption issues as well as election security issues. And we work, that office and that unit is exclusively federal law enforcement folks, whether it's IRS, other governmental agencies that are federal. But we also have task force officers, state and local folks that do work with us on some matters. And in terms of the public corruption work that we do throughout the entire district, including public corruption work that we do in this area, does have involvement with state and local law enforcement that in the very near future you'll know far more about. Did that cover both your questions? Okay. Ms. Kloss, yes.
So could you give us some idea of what the state's role was in this?
Jason, you can speak best to that. I'm not certain that in this particular matter.
If I understand your question, are you asking about the State Law Enforcement Investigative Authority or the state of Florida's role?
Both. What intersection did it have?
In this particular investigation, there is not the allegation of the abuse of state funds. It's federal funds coming from the Department of Agriculture. So there was no direct impact or involvement with the state of Florida funds. And in terms of an investigative aspect, the state of Florida did not have, as referenced by the earlier question, we routinely work with our partners with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They did not have an active role in this particular fraud, but they have assisted and continue to assist in other investigations that we are looking at.
Any reason why they weren't involved?
No reason in terms of exclusion. It's just based upon the way the investigation began. The bulk of the information involved employees of the Department of Agriculture, specifically the Farm Service Agency, and our colleagues with the Office of Inspector General are uniquely positioned to investigate those allegations. Yes, sir.
Could anyone speak to the federal program and how much money from that program comes to this area of the country every year?
I'll do my best, but I'll have a caveat by saying it's largely dependent upon environmental factors, just the nature of the charge. There are times when eligible counties experience a drought that qualify them for the particular program that we're talking about, the Livestock Disaster Forage Program. And so it's not a constant in terms of a set amount of money coming to the particular counties that we're referencing, in particular Holmes and Washington County. So it varies.
The theme of a number of questions has been the role of state and local law enforcement along with federal law enforcement. And in this particular matter, it's very federal-centric in terms of the investigative work and activity that was done on it. But in small communities and areas such as North Florida, public corruption and activities of the sort that are involved in this case, there's often overlap. There's often a network of people and interests and money that flows across county lines and across regions. And as we work on these matters, it's fascinating to see the potential overlap and intersections that occur. And in some of those other matters that we'll know more about, or we'll be able to share more about in the future, I think you will see state and local law enforcement working very closely with federal law enforcement in those. This perhaps might be an outlier, this particular matter here, in regard to very federally focused law enforcement effort. Yes?
What's going to happen to the over $300,000 of taxpayer money that was stolen? I mean, will that be returned? What becomes of it now?
Part of the process, even in a criminal case, has to do with recovery and restitution and getting back. There's forfeiture aspects to this in terms of going after and getting as much money as we can back into the federal government because they were taxpayer dollars that were stolen. But that is a component of the proceeding that we're involved in. Yes?
And then kind of what could the public look out for? I mean, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned that this was brought on by a tip or a report made. So what kind of things can people kind of look out for? Because there's lots of money, federal money coming into the area following the disaster to make sure that this isn't happening.
It is truly, it's become cliche. I think this phrase came up since 9/11. It's become part of our culture. If you see something, say something. I don't know that there's a particular path or an area to look or a way to look. If something doesn't look right or feel right, report it. Our public trust unit on our website has a hotline that you can either call on the telephone or online via email, report something. And we have staffed the public trust unit with former FBI agents that are there to field those, vet those, get them out to the active duty law enforcement folks who are involved with it. And that's what we're doing. That's why I'm emphasizing this so much, is that what's happening today is critical, it's important. You get to see public corruption, how widespread it can be. And then I foreshadowed to you that the public trust unit has more things that are on the horizon that are coming. And it is all about gathering information from regular citizens that see something that they're not comfortable with. And we look into it. We look into it aggressively. And another fascinating aspect of cases like this, very different than, let's say, gun cases or drug cases and things like that, is that the people that are involved in public corruption or having to do with undermining election security are not necessarily people that are on the street in desperate circumstances. They are very strategic, they are very calculating, they have lots of social networks. And when accountability, when a day of accountability comes, such as today, they cooperate and they provide information on things that completely are unrelated and, at least ostensibly, very disparate and very different perhaps than some of the more street level gun crimes and drug crimes.
Lastly for me, how cooperative have these people that have been arrested been in this investigation since they know they're involved and they've been in custody?
I really can't speak to that in terms of particulars or degree. It is general common knowledge that in law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement, that's how cases work. A lot of times they come in phases, and the folks that are indicted early, they cooperate. That's just how things go. This case is no different than any other. Any other?
I think we have time for one more if there's a different question.
Yes.
Okay, so if nobody else has a question, can you kind of just talk a little bit more broadly about, the decision to set up the public trust unit and kind of how this investigation maybe fits in with that?
Sure. When I came into office, I met with a number of people that were very embedded in the community at all different positions, across the whole spectrum of politics, liberal, conservative, everything in between. And one recurring theme was, why is the Northern District of Florida, my office, not active on public corruption cases? Why are we not focused on those? Why are we not allocating resources to those? We are the third largest state in the country. Tallahassee, our state capital, with $90 billion flow in and out of the legislature every year in the state of Florida. And why do we not see more prosecution activity when most of the people in the community know that it's happening? And so after I came into office, I looked around, I developed my own sense of what I thought the priorities ought to be, and it became very clear to me that there needed to be accountability in government, and that's why we formed the Public Trust Unit, and we're starting to get traction. We revealed the existence of the unit in August, and today we'll foreshadow other activity that will be coming in the near future.
I want to thank you all very much. The press release that you've been handed is now formal. This flow chart, I think, is also, Libby, going to be on the U.S. Attorney's website in the Northern District of Florida. And we thank you all very much. If you want to come up and get close-ups of this, but it's available to you digitally later today.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming.
Well, that was Lawrence Keefe and other officials holding a news conference into some widespread public corruption. He said they had 29 indictments so far. Potentially more arrests are to follow. These arrests revolved around a fraudulent drought assistance claims in excess of $373,000 in tax funds in Bay, Holmes, and Washington counties. We'll have more on this for you on News 13 Midday. That starts in about 30 minutes at 11 o'clock Central Time. And of course, I'll have a lot more for you tonight on News 13 at 5 and 6 o'clock. And of course, on mypanhandle.com. Time now to get back to The View.